Hey everyone, before we get into today's stories, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot and makes sure you get more scary and chilling stories like this. Also, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments so we can see how far our story listeners reach. I've never been someone who enjoyed big crowds, but going on a cruise felt like a once-in-a-lifetime chance to escape my routine. I was 31, worn out from work, and the idea of looking at nothing but endless ocean for days sounded calm. I booked the trip last minute, packed lightly, and promised myself I'd finally learn to turn off my phone and not think about emails. From the second I stepped onto the ship, I could feel how massive it was surrounding me. It wasn't just a boat, it was like a city floating on water. There were hundreds of cabins, restaurants, pools, theaters, families dragging bags, couples posing for photos, and workers scanning cards at the entrance. Everyone seemed filled with excitement, like they were about to enter a different world. I tried to feel the same way, but deep down, I felt like I didn't belong. My cabin was small, neat, tucked away on one of the lower decks where the vibration of the engines traveled through the floor. I didn't mind. I thought maybe the humming sound would even help me sleep. That first night, I wandered around the ship until almost midnight. The air outside was warm, the water looked like glass, and most passengers were either asleep or watching shows. I liked how empty it felt. I leaned against the railing at the back of the ship, staring into the black stretch of water trailing behind us. That was when I saw him. A man was standing alone on a lower deck, not looking at the ocean, but staring up at me. My chest tightened. I quickly stepped back and pretended to check my phone. But when I glanced down again, he was gone. I told myself not to read too much into it. On a ship this big, people came and went all the time. Still, something about how still he had stood there, just watching, unsettled me. The next morning at breakfast, the place was loud and crowded with families. I got my food and sat at the far end, trying to avoid the noise. That's when I spotted him again. The same man, maybe mid-40s with salt and pepper hair and plain clothes. He sat 2 tables away, no food, no drink, just staring in my direction. For a moment, I thought I was imagining things. Maybe he just happened to be there. But then he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It felt like he was acknowledging that I had noticed him. I pushed away my plate and left, telling myself to forget it. But by the second night, it was impossible to ignore. He showed up everywhere, outside my cabin, leaning like he belonged there, in the lounge, sitting alone in the corner, at the pool deck where I caught him watching from behind chairs. He never spoke, never moved closer, just silently watching. What made it worse was that no one else seemed to notice him. I even asked a crew member, a housekeeping woman, if she had seen someone like him. She frowned and asked for his cabin number. When I said I didn't know, she shrugged. Lots of passengers. Maybe you keep bumping into him, but I knew this wasn't random. On the third night, when I returned late, I opened my cabin door and froze. The lights were on. I knew I had turned them off. My bag, which I left zipped, was unzipped, and my clothes were folded neatly on the bed like someone had unpacked them for me. My chest went tight. I checked the bathroom, the closet. No one was there. But the air in the room felt different, like someone had been living in it. I reported it to the front desk, but the woman there brushed it off, saying sometimes the crew checks luggage or maintenance comes in. That didn't make sense. Someone had unpacked my things. She gave me a fake smile and said if anything else happened, I should let them know. I walked away angry, but mostly scared, because if it wasn't the crew, then it was him. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak, every sound in the hallway made me freeze. Around 2 a.m., there was a knock on my door. Slow, steady knocks. I didn't move. Another knock, then silence. I sat in the dark until morning, hardly breathing. The next day I tried to convince myself I was overthinking. The ship was huge and full of strangers. Maybe I just wasn't used to this. But that illusion broke when I stepped into the elevator for lunch. The doors closed, and when I turned, he was there, standing right beside me. I swear I hadn't seen him when I got in. We stood in silence. He didn't press a button. His hands hung loose, his head tilted slightly toward me. The ride felt like forever. Finally, I forced myself to ask, "Do I know you?" He smiled that same unsettling smile and said, "Not yet." When the doors opened, I rushed out. After that, I stuck to crowded places, the pool, the theater, anywhere with people. But it didn't matter. Wherever I went, he was there, always watching. I stopped eating, barely slept, and the ship that once seemed exciting now felt like a trap in the middle of the ocean with no escape. On the fifth night, something happened that proved I wasn't imagining it. I returned to my cabin after dinner and found a note on my pillow. Not typed, not official, but handwritten in shaky letters. "You shouldn't be here." My knees nearly gave out. I locked the door, shoved a chair under the handle, and sat in the corner holding that note until dawn. The next morning, I stormed to the front desk, slammed the note down, and demanded answers. The staff member frowned but shook her head. "This isn't from us." "I know it's not from you," I snapped. "Somebody got into my cabin again." She said security would check the logs, but I never heard back. That's when I started doubting more than my safety. I started doubting my own sanity. I wondered if anyone else saw him or if he only existed for me. On the sixth night, I broke. I drank heavily at one of the bars, trying to drown out the paranoia. By the time I headed back, the ship was quiet. My keycard wouldn't work. I tried again and again until I heard a voice behind me. "You don't belong here." I turned, and he stood at the end of the hall. My hands shook. My heart raced. "What do you want from me?" I shouted. He tilted his head, gave a faint smile, and stepped closer. I panicked and ran. Not towards safety, just anywhere. Down stairwells, through corridors, past empty lounges. I didn't stop until I reached the upper deck where the night air hit me. I collapsed by the railing, gasping. When I looked up, he was there too, closer this time. For the first time, I saw something in his eyes, something hungry. I froze until a couple walked by, laughing, completely unaware. When I turned back, he was gone. That was the last night I saw him. The next morning, the ship docked. I skipped breakfast, grabbed my bag, and got off the ship before most passengers were awake, as if my life depended on it. I told myself it was over, maybe just a cruel trick or my exhausted mind breaking down. I checked into a cheap hotel, locked the door, and slept for 16 hours straight. When I finally woke up, the world felt normal again. I was never the kind of person who thought I'd end up on a cruise. Growing up, our vacations were driving in my dad's old truck for a few hours to some freezing lake. But after the worst year of my life, my marriage ending, losing my job, drinking too much, I thought maybe I needed something big to reset. When a friend sent me a last-minute deal for a week-long Alaskan cruise, I bought the ticket without thinking twice. I boarded alone, and that already felt strange. Cruise ships are built for couples, families, and groups of friends laughing together. I was just a guy with a backpack and a duffel bag, with no one waiting for me on board. The ship was massive, bigger than I imagined. Inside, it felt like a floating city filled with restaurants, shops, casinos, and pools. Everything designed to keep people entertained. Everyone buzzed with excitement, like they were stepping into a new world. But for me, the constant hum of strangers only reminded me of how alone I was. During the first 2 days, I kept mostly to myself. I walked around the decks, ate quiet dinners by the windows, and spent time just watching the endless water stretching out on all sides. At night, I would slip away from the noise and music to stand on the upper deck, staring at the dark ocean. That's when I began to notice something strange. Every night, around the same time, a man stood at the far end of the deck. He was always alone, leaning against the railing, staring down into the water. He didn't look like a regular tourist. He never joined the games at the pool, the shows, or the karaoke nights. He just appeared there after midnight, wearing a dark jacket, barely moving. At first, I didn't think much of it. People do odd things on vacation. But on the second night when I passed by him, he turned his head slightly, just enough for me to see his face, pale, almost gray, with heavy shadows under his eyes. The way he looked at me wasn't casual. It was sharp, focused, like he knew me somehow. I hurried past, telling myself it was nothing, maybe just my imagination. The third night, though, he was back. Same place, same stillness. But this time, when I stepped onto the deck, I realized I was the only one out there with him. The rest of the ship fell asleep. The sky was cloudy, the stars hidden, the ocean black and rolling softly. I walked toward the railing, trying to act like I didn't notice him, but I could feel his eyes following me. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, steady. "You ever think about how easy it would be to disappear out here?" I froze, gripping the cold railing tighter. I didn't answer. I didn't even turn my head. I just stood there pretending to stare at the water. He took a slow step closer and said, "One push. That's all it takes. Nobody would ever find you. They wouldn't even know until it was too late." My skin went cold. I glanced at him, but his expression didn't change. There was no smirk, no sign of a joke, just hollow eyes fixed on me. I muttered something like, "I should get back," and quickly left. My heart pounded the whole walk down the corridor toward my cabin. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the ship made me jump. Every sound in the hallway put me on edge. I told myself he was probably drunk, just trying to scare me. But there was something in his voice, too calm, too certain, that stayed with me. The next morning, I forced myself to act normal. I went to breakfast, sat by the window, and watched families laughing over pancakes and juice. Everything looked normal, but I couldn't stop replaying what he had said. That sentence felt less like a threat and more like a fact. I almost reported it, but what would I say? Some man on deck made a creepy comment. Security would laugh. Maybe they'd check, maybe not. I told myself to just keep to crowded places and wait out the rest of the trip. That plan worked until the fifth night. I had gone to the lounge for a drink, and when I returned, the hallway near my cabin was darker than usual. Half the lights flickered weakly. As I walked, I saw something ahead, a figure standing completely still in the middle of the corridor. My stomach twisted. As I came closer, I realized it was him. Same jacket, same pale face. He didn't move, didn't smile, just stared like he had been waiting for me. The hallway was too narrow to turn back. My only choice was to walk past him. My heart pounded so hard I could barely hear anything else. He didn't say a word, didn't step aside. His eyes stayed on me as I hurried by. My hands shook so much I almost dropped my key card trying to unlock my cabin door. I slipped inside quickly, slammed the door, and locked it. I leaned against the door, listening to the silence. For a moment, there was nothing. Then faintly, I heard footsteps, slow, heavy, right outside my door. They stopped just short of where I stood. I held my breath, waiting. After a long pause, the footsteps faded away. The next morning, I decided I had to find him. I thought maybe in the daylight, he'd look different, less terrifying. Maybe I'd realize I had been exaggerating it all in my head, but he was nowhere to be found. Not in the dining halls, not on the decks, not in the bars. It was like he didn't exist during the day. That night, I stayed in my cabin with all the lights on, the TV playing just for noise. Hours passed, midnight came and went. I didn't move, but the longer I sat there, the more I realized something was wrong. The hall outside was completely quiet. Normally, I'd hear voices, laughter, doors opening and closing. But that night, there was nothing. And then 3 knocks on my door. Not random banging, not a mistake. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. My throat went dry. "Who is it?" I asked, my voice shaking. No answer, just silence. I stood frozen, feeling time stretch. Maybe it was only a minute, but it felt endless. Finally, I backed away, sat on the bed, and stayed awake until the sun came up. The cruise was only halfway done, but I couldn't take it anymore. The ship felt like a cage, with no way out. I went to the front desk and asked if I could leave early at the next port. They told me it wasn't possible. Once you're on, you stay until the end. That night I didn't sleep again. Every shift of the water, every groan of the walls made me feel like he was just outside, waiting. On the 6th night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I forced myself to go outside, thinking maybe fresh air would help clear my head. The ship was quiet, the ocean black all around. I walked to the upper deck, and there he was, in the same place as before. But this time, he wasn't alone. Another man stood beside him, dressed the same, leaning on the railing. When I stopped in the doorway, both of them turned and looked directly at me. No smile, no movement, just empty stares. I backed away slowly, then quicker, until I was nearly running. I didn't stop until I was back in my cabin with the door locked and the lights blazing. I never saw them again after that night, but I also never slept. Every shadow felt like it was bending toward me. Every sound felt like it was made on purpose. By the time the cruise ended, I stumbled off the ship like a man escaping a nightmare. I don't tell many people this story because how could I explain it? How do you describe men who only seem to appear in the hours when everyone else was asleep? And how do you explain the way one sentence still echoes in my mind like it was whispered only yesterday? On push, that's all it takes. I was standing at the rail of the cruise ship when it all began, staring down at the black water. The ocean was calm that night, the surface smooth like glass, only broken by the wake of the ship. To anyone else, it was the perfect holiday scene. Hundreds of people inside the lounges laughing, drinking, dancing, while outside the cool air surrounded me. I was never much of a partier, so I found my quiet spots. I liked the sound of the water more than the noise of strangers. I had saved almost 2 years for this trip, and it was supposed to be the highlight of my life. 10 days at sea on one of the largest cruise liners in the world. The brochures had promised fine dining, endless entertainment, pools, casinos, gyms, even a theater with live shows every night. And they delivered. The ship felt like a floating city. But after a few nights, something started to eat away at me. Something that had nothing to do with seasickness or boredom. It started small. A woman I had noticed on deck, maybe in her late 30s, with dark hair and a red scarf, vanished. Not that I realized right away. On a ship with more than 3,000 passengers, people disappear into the background. But I remembered her because one morning she had sat at the same breakfast table as me, alone, picking at a croissant. We never spoke, but I remembered the tired look in her eyes. 3 days later, I overheard 2 cleaning staff whispering in Spanish near one of the lower decks. They kept whispering the same 2 words over and over, Muhari and Perita, then adding something about a woman who had gone missing. When they noticed me standing there, their faces stiffened. They froze for a second, then hurried away like I wasn't supposed to hear them. I tried to brush it off, but the way they glanced at me on their way out, nervous, almost guilty, kept echoing in my mind. Later that day, I casually asked at the guest services desk if anyone had gone missing. The young guy behind the counter smiled too wide, his voice too cheerful. "No, sir. Everyone's accounted for." That was the first lie, though I didn't realize it then. I told myself maybe I was just being paranoid. That evening, I went to dinner at one of the smaller restaurants tucked away on the ship. It was dim inside with big glass windows that looked out onto the endless black ocean. Across the room sat 2 men in suits. the kind you didn't normally see on a cruise. They weren't enjoying themselves, weren't laughing like the other guests. They sat stiff, heads bent low, talking quickly. One of them looked like a Wall Street broker, slick hair and shiny shoes. The other had a long scar cutting across his jawline. Neither of them fit here, but the way they carried themselves made it clear they felt like they belonged. I stared too long. The scarred one noticed. His eyes locked on mine, sharp and unflinching. I looked away fast, heart jumping. When I dared to look back, their table was empty. There were decks on the ship passengers weren't supposed to go into, areas reserved only for the crew. I never had a reason to wander down there, not until the fifth night when I couldn't sleep and decided to walk. The passenger hallways were silent, carpet muffling my footsteps, most people either asleep or at the casino. I ended up by a door marked crew access only. A couple walked past laughing, not noticing me. The door wasn't shut all the way. Something told me to leave it alone, but I pushed it open and slipped inside. The air changed immediately. It smelled metallic, damp, like oil and rust. Pipes ran along the ceiling. The floor was steel instead of carpet, every step echoing. I knew I didn't belong here, but then I heard voices ahead. I moved slowly, hugging the wall until I reached a half-open door, spilling yellow light into the hall. I peeked inside and froze. The room was small, barely more than a storage closet, with tables pushed against the walls. On those tables sat stacks of small boxes, each marked with numbers. Standing around them were the two men from the restaurant, the slick-haired one and the scarred one, along with a third man wearing a crew uniform, sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening on his neck. They weren't just talking, they were counting money, piles of it. The scarred man opened a box, pulled out a bag filled with white powder, and nodded like it was good. My stomach twisted. Drugs. More than I'd ever seen. The staff member shifted uneasily, glancing toward the door. "You're moving too much of it," he muttered. "Someone's going to notice." Scar's voice cut back cold and low. "Then keep your people quiet." My pulse hammered. I began stepping back slowly, but the steel floor creaked. Scar's head snapped toward the door. I bolted, running until I was back in the passenger areas, lungs burning, shirt damp with sweat. People passed by, laughing, drunk, totally unaware of what I had just seen. I couldn't tell anyone, not without sounding crazy. "Hey, I just saw a drug operation in the lower decks." They'd laugh, or worse, they'd report me to the very people running it. But I knew now, there was a crime ring hidden under our feet, and the crew was in on it. The next morning, I told myself to keep quiet and just finish the cruise. Get off when we docked and never look back. But fear has a way of staying with you. Every time I walked through the ship, I felt eyes on me. In the buffet line, in the hallways, even on the deck at night. A shadow would linger too close, then slip away when I looked. 2 nights later, something happened that shattered my silence. When I came back to my cabin, the door was cracked open. My key had been in my pocket all day. My heart pounded as I pushed it wider. The lights were off, but the room wasn't right. My suitcase was unzipped, clothes pulled out, and the small notebook where I'd written notes about the men and the missing woman, it was gone. I locked the door and sat on the bed, chest tight. They knew. From then, paranoia ate at me. Instead of staying out of trouble, I started watching even closer. I noticed how certain crew members avoided eye contact, how they nodded at each other near certain doors. I saw unmarked crates being wheeled through corridors late at night. And one evening, near the laundry rooms on a lower deck, I saw her again, the woman with the red scarf. Relief flooded me. She wasn't missing after all. But why was she down there in crew areas? I followed from a distance, confusion knotting my stomach. She slipped into a room. I waited, then crept closer. When the door opened, it wasn't her who walked out. It was Scar. His eyes found me instantly. This time he smiled. After that, the cruise became a nightmare. My cabin phone rang late at night, only silence on the other end. I'd hear footsteps following me in the halls. Once I woke to the sound of someone rattling my door handle. By the 8th day, I broke. I stormed into the captain's office, demanding to speak to him. The secretary hesitated, then let me in. The captain listened calmly as I poured everything out. The crates, the drugs, the men, the woman. His face stayed blank. When I finished, he leaned forward and said softly, "You've seen too much." Ice filled my veins. He picked up the phone, dialed, and spoke only 2 words. "Come in." The door opened. Scar stepped inside. I ran before they could grab me, tearing through the hallways, shoving past startled passengers. Alarms blared somewhere behind me. Maybe security, maybe worse. I didn't care. I sprinted past the casino, past the theater, until I reached the lifeboats. The ocean roared below, wind howling against my skin. My only chance was to escape. I fumbled with the release, heart pounding, footsteps closing in behind me. I jumped. The freezing water swallowed me whole. After that, it's all a blur. Waves crashing, darkness, engines fading away. When I finally woke, I was on a fishing boat, shivering, half-conscious, pulled from the sea by strangers who'd found me floating miles from the cruise liner. They told me the ship had carried on as if nothing happened. No alarms, no missing person reports. And when we docked, I found out something worse. According to the ship's records, I had never even been on board. I walked down the same hallway where I'd first seen the girl, this time during the day, acting like I was just lost. When I passed her door, it opened just a crack, and for a split second I saw her again. This time her lips moved. One word came out. "Help." I froze, but before I could react, the door slammed shut. My chest tightened. That moment told me I couldn't ignore it anymore. That night, when the halls were quiet, I went back. I pressed my ear against the door I thought was hers. Inside, I could hear shuffling, whispers, faint footsteps. I gathered my courage and knocked softly, once, then again. Silence. Then I heard a quick scuffle, like someone being dragged away. Suddenly, footsteps came pounding down the hallway, heavy and fast. I panicked and ran, slipping back into my room. I locked the door, heart racing, just as 3 loud knocks hit my cabin door, slow and deliberate. I didn't breathe. Minutes passed before the footsteps finally moved on. By then, I knew I wasn't imagining any of this. They knew I had seen too much, and if I wasn't careful, I'd end up trapped behind one of those doors myself. I couldn't wait until we docked. I had to act before it was too late. On the 6th night, I took a risk. I followed one of the suited men when he left the restricted hallway, keeping far behind with my head down. He led me through a service stairwell, deeper into parts of the ship passengers weren't supposed to enter. My heartbeat thudded in my ears as I crept along the walls, trying to stay hidden. That's when I found it. A large cargo hold sealed off with partitions, the kind passengers never saw. I didn't need to get closer to know what was inside. I could hear it. People. Dozens of them. My breath caught. Before I could move, before I could even think, a strong hand clamped onto my shoulder. I spun and came face to face with one of the men. His expression was calm, even amused. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. Panic shot through me. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to my cabin, only that my lungs burned, my legs felt like stone. But somehow I slammed the lock shut behind me. I sat there the whole night with my back against the door, gripping the cabin phone, debating whether to call anyone at all. The next morning there was a knock, light, almost hesitant. I froze. When I didn't answer, a voice whispered through the crack. "Please, you're the only one who saw. Don't let them take us." My throat went dry. It was the girl. I started to move toward the door, but before I could, heavy footsteps stormed down the hallway. There was a sharp yelp, then silence. I never saw her again. When the cruise finally docked, I walked off like a ghost, blending into the sea of smiling families and sunburned tourists. No one looked twice at me, but I knew the truth. Somewhere deep below deck, behind locked doors no one ever asked about, people were still trapped. And the worst part was knowing no one would believe me. I never thought a cruise would leave me with a secret that could destroy lives. When I first boarded, all I wanted was a break from the grind of my office job, some fresh ocean air, and maybe the chance to meet a few new people. I had saved for months for this, my first cruise ever. Everything felt surreal at first. The endless buffets, the pools, the sheer size of the ship. It was like stepping into a floating city where nothing bad could happen, but that fantasy didn't last. On the third night after dinner, I wandered onto one of the quieter decks. Most of the other passengers were at the bars or the theater, but I wanted a little peace from the noise. The deck was nearly empty, just the hum of the engines and the water churning against the hull. That's when I saw them, two men dragging something across the floor near a service door. At first I thought it was luggage, but then the dim light hit it, and I froze. It wasn't luggage. It was a body. They moved quickly, not expecting anyone to be around. I ducked behind a column, my pulse racing as I watched them lift the body, a man, mid-30s maybe in regular clothes, and shove him through the service door. One of them muttered something about finishing before shift change. Then the door shut, and they were gone. I stood there for a long time, trying to tell myself I hadn't just seen what I saw. Maybe it was medical. Maybe they were helping someone. But the limpness of the body, the way they rushed, it wasn't right. I thought about going to security, but another thought made me freeze. What if security was part of it? Whoever those men were, they weren't afraid of killing someone on a ship with thousands of people. What would they do to me if I talked? That night I hardly slept. Every creak of the ship made me sit up, replaying the scene in my head, wondering if that man had still been alive when I saw him, or if he was already gone, tossed into the ocean. The next day I forced myself to act normal. I ate breakfast, strolled the decks, even joined a trivia game just to blend in. But my eyes kept scanning the crowd, searching for the men. On such a massive ship, I figured I might never spot them again. But eventually, I did. One of them sat near the pool with a drink in his hand, laughing casually, blending in like any other tourist. That chilled me more than anything. He wasn't hiding. Later, wandering past a crew-only hallway while pretending to be lost, I caught a glimpse inside a room before the door closed. A shoe stuck out from under a tarp, the same kind of shoe the man had been wearing. My stomach sank. The door shut quickly, and a crew member smiled tightly. "Passenger areas are the other way," he said. His voice was polite, but his eyes were cold. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just one murder. People were covering it up, maybe even running it. I wanted to tell security, but the idea felt like a trap. If they were part of it, I'd be signing my own death sentence. But if I stayed silent, I'd be guilty too. I started writing everything down. Times, places, descriptions. If anything happened to me, I wanted a record left behind. I slipped the notes into a book in my cabin. Every night I locked the door and shoved a chair against it, even though I knew it wouldn't stop anyone who really wanted in. On the sixth night, things escalated. As I walked back to my room, I felt footsteps behind me. The hallway was quiet, narrow. When I turned, I saw him, the man from the pool, the same one who dragged the body. He smiled faintly like he knew me. My stomach dropped. I quickened my pace, so did he. By the time I reached my cabin, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely swipe my keycard. I slammed the door shut, locked it, and pressed my back against it. Silence, then a soft knock. "Wrong room," he said casually, but I knew better. He wanted me scared. And it worked. The rest of the trip, I barely left my cabin. I ordered room service, kept the curtains closed, and slept only in restless bursts. The ship felt less like a vacation and more like a cage. There was no police, nowhere safe to run. When we finally docked, I expected to be grabbed, to be stopped, but nothing happened. Passengers filed off, laughing, saying goodbye, carrying souvenirs. I walked among them, my heart pounding, waiting for a hand to grab me, but it never came. I thought about going straight to the authorities, but another fear froze me. By now, they could have covered everything up, with no name, no proof. Who would believe me? I saw a body on a cruise ship. That would sound insane. To this day, I keep those notes in a drawer, a reminder of what I saw. I don't know who the man was or why he had to die. But I know one thing for certain. There's a secret buried on that ship that nobody talks about, and I will never set foot on a cruise again. I booked that cruise because I thought I needed a reset. Work had drained me, sleepless nights piled up, and I figured a week at sea might clear my head. The ship was enormous, like a floating city with pools, theaters, buffets, and cabins stacked like a hotel on water. I never imagined I'd be fighting for my life on it. At first, it was overwhelming. The glass elevators rising over the glittering lobby, families smiling for photos, couples clinking champagne glasses, kids running wild. I dropped my bag in my cabin and stepped onto the balcony. Behind us, the port shrank into the distance, warehouses and cranes giving way to endless sea. I remember thinking nothing bad could happen out here. Too many people, too much order, too much money in this floating palace. That thought didn't last. The first 2 days were easy. I woke early, jogged the track at sunrise, had coffee and eggs, read by the pool, and made small talk with strangers. Everyone seemed happy, relaxed, wrapped in vacation bliss. I let myself sink into it, but on the third night, close to midnight, I couldn't sleep. I wandered into one of the quieter corridors on deck 5. The music and chatter were gone, replaced by the hum of the ship and the creaks of the hull against the waves. And that's when I saw something I would never forget. Rounding the corner, I noticed 3 men in crew uniforms, white shirts, black pants, radios on their belts. At first glance, nothing strange, but the way they moved wasn't like the other staff. They were quick, whispering to each other, their eyes darting around like they were trying not to be seen. And instead of heading towards staff-only doors, they were cutting right through passenger areas, almost as if they were avoiding somewhere else. I tried to calm myself, telling my brain not to overthink it. Maybe I was tired. Maybe they were fixing a leak or rushing to a medical issue. But then one of them pulled something from under his jacket. At first, I thought it was just a pipe, but when the light hit, I realized it wasn't. It was a weapon. My stomach dropped. I pressed myself into the shadow of a small alcove, holding my breath until they disappeared into a stairwell. My heartbeat was so loud I swore someone would hear it. I rushed back to my cabin, locked the door, and paced in panic. Who could I even tell? If I called security and said I saw a crew with weapons, would they believe me or just think I was drunk, paranoid, or joking? The next morning, everything looked so normal, it almost felt like a dream. Kids splashed in pools, waiters carried trays of cocktails, the cruise director cracked jokes over the loudspeaker. For a while, I convinced myself maybe I'd gotten it wrong. But later in the atrium, I spotted one of those men again. He wasn't fixing pipes or guiding passengers. He was standing near the bar, not drinking, not talking, just scanning the room carefully. And when his eyes landed on me, he didn't look away. He stared just a second too long, and my stomach tightened. That night, the whole ship's mood shifted. I was sitting in the theater watching a comedy show when the lights flickered. Once, twice, then total darkness. People screamed, then laughed nervously as the emergency lights glowed. The comedian tried to lighten the mood, but then a voice came over the intercom. It wasn't the captain, and it wasn't the cruise director. The voice was calm, steady, but cold. Attention passengers, stay seated, stay quiet. This ship is under our control. Cooperate, and no one gets hurt. The room erupted. People gasped. Some shouted. A few ran for the exits. But before anyone got far, armed men stormed in. They weren't masked, just wearing the same crew uniforms I'd seen. Guns in their hands, sharp eyes scanning. "Sit down," one barked. A man near the front row tried to argue, and they smashed him across the face with a rifle. Blood sprayed, and the silence that followed was heavier than anything I'd ever felt. And it wasn't just in the theater. From beyond the doors, I heard more chaos. People crying, guards yelling, orders being shouted in accented English. This wasn't a prank. They had taken the ship. Time blurred after that. They herded us into big rooms. The lounge, the theater, dining halls, forcing everyone to sit. They moved through, grabbing phones, jewelry, wallets. One of them announced the ship was changing course. "Stay calm, don't resist, and you live." I kept my head down, pretending calm, though inside I was shaking so hard it hurt. Out here, in the middle of the ocean, no one was coming to help. But I noticed something. They weren't everywhere. There were maybe 20 of them at most, spread thin across a ship holding thousands. They depended on shock, on fear, on control. And whispers had already started between passengers, careful and quiet. I caught bits of it, strangers glancing at each other, exchanging the same thought. Maybe we could fight back. The idea terrified me more than sitting still. If we tried and failed, they'd kill us. But if we did nothing, we'd just be waiting to die. And it was clear by the fourth day that this wasn't just robbery. Through cracks in the curtains, I saw the horizon. We weren't heading toward any port. We were going deeper into open sea. Rumors swirled. Ransom, trafficking, maybe a deal with a hostile state. Nobody knew. But what was certain was that we weren't being taken home. That night in the dining hall, I slipped away, pretending I needed the bathroom. Two others followed, a man named Brian and a woman named Elena. In whispers, we admitted the same thing. The hijackers had blind spots. The aft stairwell was unguarded sometimes. A storage room near the kitchens had tools. We had no real weapons, but we had numbers. Numbers meant hope. We decided to try at midnight, when the hijackers usually change positions. My legs almost gave out from fear, but I forced them to move. The three of us slipped into the stairwell, creeping down. Brian grabbed a wrench. Elena found a heavy fire extinguisher. I clutched a thick flashlight, its cold weight solid in my hands. We weren't alone. 5 more joined us in the shadows, desperate enough to take the risk. We waited. Footsteps came. 2 guards, rifles hanging loose, laughing. We lunged. It was brutal, fast, messy. The wrench cracked against one man's skull. The extinguisher slammed into the other's chest. They went down hard, muffled screams lost in the chaos of our attack. I'll never forget the sound. The crack, the thud, the struggle. We took their guns and radios. Suddenly, we weren't just passengers anymore. We were fighters. We split into groups, moving through the ship, listening for hijacker chatter. They were panicking. They knew we'd resisted, and that was our opening. Small battles broke out across the ship. Hallways turned into ambush points. Dining rooms became barricades. We outnumbered them 10 to 1, and with weapons in our hands, their control started to collapse. But they fought viciously, firing into crowds, threatening to blow the engines, screaming they'd sink us all if they lost. The final standoff came at the bridge. Their leader, the same voice from the intercom, had barricaded himself with two others. The captain was tied up inside, bloodied but alive. Through the glass, we could see him yelling for us not to rush. "Back or we kill him!" Nobody moved. My heart was hammering so hard I thought I'd faint. Then Elena whispered, "They need him alive. They can't sail without him." She was right. That was their weakness. We forced the door. Shots rang out. Glass shattered. The captain dropped to the floor. The hijackers scrambled to reload, but Brian charged with his wrench, wild with rage. I raised the stolen gun and fired before I even thought. The sound was deafening, the recoil brutal. The man dropped. The others fell quickly after. By dawn, the last hijackers were tied in the lounge under guard. The captain's voice shook as he came back over the intercom. "The ship is ours again," he said. People cried, hugged strangers, sank to the floor in relief. I stood there, gun in my hand, staring at the blood, unsure if I felt relief or guilt. 2 days later, we limped into port, escorted by Navy ships. The hijackers were dragged away in chains. Reporters swarmed the dock, but I stayed silent. What could I say? That I came on a cruise to relax and ended up killing a man to live. That in the middle of the ocean, with no law or rescue, the only thing left was survival. I haven't stepped on a cruise ship since, and I never will. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear that cold voice on the intercom declaring the ship was theirs. And I remember the moment fear turned into something darker. The part of me that knew the only way out was to fight like hell. I had signed on to the cruise because I needed a break from work. I thought 10 days at sea would be the reset I craved. The first few nights were peaceful, open blue water, dinners under the stars, mornings on deck with coffee in hand. But halfway through, things shifted. It started small, just a rumor whispered around the pool bar. A bartender told a couple that one of the engine alarms had gone off the night before. Nothing serious, he assured, just a sensor glitch. But the couple mentioned it at dinner, and by morning, the whole deck was buzzing. Some said they'd felt their cabins vibrate, like the floor was humming too hard. I wouldn't have thought much of it, except I'd felt it myself. Around 3 in the morning, I woke to the faint rattle of a glass on my nightstand, the water inside trembling. When I pressed my palm to the wall, I felt a low, uneven vibration. By daylight, it was gone. At breakfast, I overheard 2 men talking quietly at the next table. They said they'd seen crew wheeling equipment into the lower decks, gear that didn't look like it belonged on a passenger ship. One of them whispered sabotage. The other shook his head, but he lowered his voice when he said it. That word stuck in my head all day. Sabotage. It made the whole ship feel different. It wasn't just a big hotel on the water anymore. It felt like a target. By evening, I couldn't shake the uneasiness. I walked down one of the quieter hallways that led to the service areas. The usual sounds of people laughing and talking were gone, and all I heard was the low thrum of the engines deep below. Then I thought I caught hurried footsteps behind a locked door, followed by the clang of metal hitting the floor. I leaned closer, and for a moment, I swear I heard voices. Quick, sharp, in a language I didn't understand. When I stepped back, I almost ran right into a crew member. He gave me a polite smile, but his eyes stayed on me a little too long, like he knew I'd been listening. The next night, things grew worse. Just after midnight, alarms went off somewhere below. Not the kind that told us to evacuate, but sharp beeping sounds that echoed through the ship. I peeked into the hallway and saw 3 crew members running past with tools in their hands. I asked one what was going on, but he only said, "Stay in your cabin, please." Something in his voice made me doubt him. Instead of listening, I followed them at a distance, slipping into a stairwell. I stayed hidden at the landing as their voices carried through the hum of machinery. One sounded furious. "If it goes down again, people will notice. We can't keep covering it up." The others whispered fast, arguing. I couldn't catch everything, But I heard enough. Sabotage, power grid, backup system. That's when it sank in. I wasn't imagining things. Someone really was tampering with the ship. The next morning, the captain made an announcement. He said there'd been a small technical issue overnight, but assured us everything was fine. His calm tone didn't match what I'd seen or overheard, and I wasn't the only one paying attention anymore. At dinner, a man traveling alone leaned close to me and whispered, "You hear about the wiring?" I played dumb, but he smirked like he could see right through me. He said he'd worked in maritime security before, and he knew when things didn't add up. "This isn't an accident," he muttered. "Somebody wants the ship compromised." That night I hardly slept. Every creak of the ship sounded sharper, every vibration heavier. I even started carrying a flashlight in my pocket, just in case. 2 nights later, the lights went out. Not for long, maybe 30 seconds. But the hallways were thrown into total darkness. The engines went silent. There was nothing, not even a hum, just people shouting in the black. Then suddenly the lights flickered back on. Crew members came rushing in, saying it was only a test. At 2 in the morning, I knew then the man was right. Somebody was sabotaging the ship. Word spread quickly after that. People whispered in the bars, swapping theories. Some said it was rival companies. Others thought terrorists. A few swore it was an inside job. And I kept noticing the same crew member, the one who'd caught me near the service hallway. He was everywhere, at the railings near the dining areas, sometimes passing me in the stairwell. Always with that same polite smile, always watching. On the 8th night, I saw him again. This time he wasn't alone. He entered a restricted stairwell with 2 others. I followed from a distance and ended up deep in the lower decks. The air was heavy with the oily smell of machinery. I crouched behind a crate and watched them. One was splicing wires inside an open electrical panel. Another held a flashlight. The third, my watcher, kept glancing over his shoulder, tense. I leaned too far forward and my foot slipped against the crate. The sound echoed loud in the metal corridor. The flashlight snapped toward me. For one frozen second, I couldn't move. Then I ran. Their footsteps thundered behind me as they gave chase. I didn't look back. I sprinted until I found a stairwell and shoved the door shut behind me. The next morning, nothing was said. No announcements, no explanations, not even a mention of the blackout. But I knew. They knew I had seen too much. From then on, I stayed away from the lower decks. I stuck to crowded areas, always keeping people nearby. But the feeling never left me. Something was still coming. The sabotage wasn't over. On the last night of the cruise, just after midnight, the alarms screamed again. This time they weren't distant. They shook the walls, shrill and urgent. Passengers stumbled into the halls in panic as lights flickered above. For one terrifying moment, I thought the ship was about to die under us, that the sabotage had finally worked. But then just as suddenly it stopped. The lights steadied. The engines roared back. The alarms cut off. The captain's voice came on, calm as ever. "False alarm," he said. "There is no danger." But I knew that wasn't true. I saw the fear in the crew's faces. I heard the footsteps running below deck. The sabotage had failed, or maybe it had only half succeeded. Either way, I left that ship knowing the truth had been buried under the captain's soothing voice, and the passengers need to believe him. And I will never forget that crew member's smile when I disembarked, standing by the exit ramp, watching me go as if to say, "You saw, and you'll never prove it." I booked the cruise because I needed an escape. Work had drained me. Life felt dull, and the brochures promised rest and adventure. I pictured lazy days at sea, quiet evenings with a drink, maybe meeting someone interesting. Nothing about it suggested danger. The ship was massive, overwhelming at first. My cabin was small, with a window looking out at endless blue water. That first night, I wandered to get my bearings. Crowds moved between buffets. Music thumped from a lounge. Families took photos in the long carpeted halls. It all seemed normal, but I remember now how the staff moved. Some too fast, some avoiding eye contact, like there were places on the ship they didn't want to talk about. I wouldn't have noticed, except for one thing. Around midnight, after too many drinks at the bar, I got lost trying to find my cabin. I went down the wrong staircase and ended up in a hallway that clearly wasn't for passengers. The walls were bare metal, no carpet. The engine's hum was louder. I realized I'd wandered into a crew area and turned back. Just before leaving, I noticed an unmarked door. Then a man in uniform appeared suddenly, almost bumping into me. He smiled quickly, too quickly, blocking my view of the door. "Lost?" he asked. I nodded, embarrassed. He directed me upstairs, but that smile stayed in my head. It wasn't friendly. It was a warning. Don't come back here. For the next 2 days, I tried to ignore it. I swam, watched the shows, ate dinners. I even spent time with a woman named Elena, traveling alone too. But every now and then, I caught sight of that same crew member watching me from a distance. On the third night, I woke at 2 a.m. My cabin felt too hot, and I couldn't sleep. I wandered the ship. Most decks were empty, only the hum of the engines and the shuffle of cleaning staff breaking the silence. Somehow, I ended up near the lower levels again. The same unmarked door caught my eye. My curiosity won. I checked around. No one. I turned the handle. To my surprise, it wasn't locked. A dim stairwell led down. The air smelled of dust and machinery. I hesitated, then stepped down a few stairs. Voices drifted up, quick and serious. I should have stopped, but I kept going, quiet as I could. At the bottom, I reached another door. Through a thin gap, I saw a wide room. What I saw didn't make sense. Tables lined up with jewelry, watches, even weapons. Men in suits and women in dresses walked around, bidding on items. It looked like an auction, but hidden inside the cruise ship. My chest tightened as I realized this was no normal auction. One table displayed passports, credit cards, IDs. Another had piles of prescription drugs. Then something worse. Someone rolled out a cage. Inside was a boy, maybe 12, terrified and silent. My blood ran cold. I backed away, shaking. A black market auction, jewelry, drugs, stolen identities, even people, right under our feet. The stair creaked under me, and voices inside stopped. My heart pounded. I turned to leave, but the door above opened. The same crew member stepped in, staring at me. This time he didn't smile. He grabbed my arm hard. "You shouldn't be here." His voice was low, dangerous. I tried to stammer an excuse, but he cut me off. "Save it." "You saw too much." I yanked free and bolted, my footsteps echoing as I sprinted back to the passenger decks. I didn't stop until I reached crowded areas. That night I locked myself in my cabin, trembling at every sound. I knew I couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? If the crew was involved, who could I trust? The next day I pretended everything was normal, but paranoia ate at me. That crew member kept showing up, sometimes near, sometimes farther away, but always watching. At lunch, I saw him whispering with 2 other staff. They glanced at me and my stomach dropped. I thought of telling Elena, but dragging her into it felt dangerous. That night, I couldn't resist. I needed proof. I slipped my phone into my pocket and went back. I waited until the corridor was clear, then opened the unmarked door. My hands shook as I went down. At the bottom, I pressed my phone to the crack, recording. I caught a few seconds. Tables, bidding, cages in the corner. Proof. Suddenly, a hand yanked me back. The crew member snarled, furious. "You don't learn, do you?" He shoved me against the wall. "You think you can take this upstairs?" I elbowed him hard and bolted again. This time, 2 more men waited at the top. I barely slipped past, running full speed, crashing into drunk passengers, which gave me enough cover to escape. I made it to my cabin, locked the door, and collapsed. I had the video, but what good was it if they caught me first? The next day dragged on endlessly. I stayed in crowded areas, always aware of the men shadowing me, blending in as crew but always near. I didn't know how much longer I could last. There were still 4 days left, 4 long days trapped on a floating prison with people who wanted me gone. I tried to send the video online, but the ship's Wi-Fi was useless. Email, social media, everything failed. By the fifth night, I was drained, living on fear. I decided I had to tell someone. Elena was my only chance. I found her on deck, watching the water. I pulled her aside and spilled everything, fast and desperate. She went pale but then whispered, "I've seen something too." She told me she'd noticed strange staff movements, passengers disappearing at night. She hadn't gone as far as I had, but she suspected something was wrong. We agreed to stick together. 2 people were better than one, but safety was only an illusion. That night, as we walked back to our cabins, the lights flickered. The crew member appeared again with 2 others, blocking the hallway. "You should have stayed out of this," he said coldly. We ran. Eleanor and I sprinted, hearts racing, pushing past anyone in our way. The men didn't stop. They stayed on our trail no matter where we went. We ran through stairwells, cut across different decks, and finally slipped into a small storage room. Inside, we pressed ourselves flat against the wall, holding our breath as footsteps thundered past outside. My phone was still in my pocket, the recording still saved. Proof was there, but surviving until the ship reached port was all that mattered now. The next 3 days became a blur. We barely closed our eyes, never walked alone, and always kept ourselves in crowded areas where people surrounded us. Still, the men never strayed far. They circled, watching, waiting for us to slip. When the ship finally reached land, relief hit me so hard my knees almost buckled. But as we stepped onto the gangway, I saw them one last time, standing on the deck, motionless, their faces empty of emotion, their eyes fixed on us. Elena and I never spoke of it again, but the truth sat heavy between us. We had stumbled into something far bigger than either of us could handle. Even now, I think about that ship and how many people had disappeared on it, brushed off as accidents or careless wanderers, while in reality, something sinister was happening below the surface, something that looked like an auction for human lives, carried out beneath our feet. When I boarded that cruise, I had only expected the typical things: buffets stacked with food, live music echoing in the lounges, long lazy afternoons by the pool, and neon-lit nights filled with drinks. Trouble wasn't something I had been looking for. In truth, I had taken the trip to escape it. Endless shifts at work, bills piling up faster than I could pay them, and a breakup that left me drained had all pushed me to book this vacation. I wanted a pause from life, a place to breathe. The first few days were exactly what I needed. The ship felt like a floating paradise. My cabin was small but comfortable, the kind of place that felt safe once you locked the door. The food was nonstop: buffets, snacks, desserts, and I even met a few people who, like me, were simply eager to leave their lives behind for a little while. For those first 2 nights, it felt like I'd done the right thing. But then little things started to gnaw at me. Sounds at night that didn't belong. Not the gentle hum of the engines or the clang of pipes, but faint thuds that seemed to come from behind the walls. Sometimes there was a dragging sound that followed, soft but heavy, like weight being moved. At first, I told myself it was nothing more than maintenance work. But one evening, when I casually asked a crew member about it, he wouldn't meet my eyes. All he said was, "Best to keep your door locked at night." That should have scared me. Instead, it only lit a strange curiosity. By the third night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., the dragging sound came again, clearer than before. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow it. I slipped quietly out of my cabin, barefoot so the floor wouldn't betray me, and padded down the corridor. The ship was unnervingly still. No footsteps, no chatter spilling from bars, no laughter from late-night wanderers, just the crash of the ocean outside and that faint dragging leading me onward. The noise pulled me toward a part of the ship I had never noticed before, a stairwell, narrow and cold, not on any of the maps given to passengers. I followed it down, deeper with each step, until the carpets gave way to bare metal floors. The air grew sharp with the smell of chemicals, and my pulse hammered so loud it filled my ears. Finally, I came to a steel door left slightly open. From inside came a pale glow of fluorescent light and the sound of movement. I nudged the door just enough to see, and what I glimpsed rooted me in place. There were people strapped onto gurneys, 5 at least, their wrists tied, mouths gagged, IV tubes dripping into their arms. They weren't guests. They looked frail, terrified, drained of life. Around them stood men in medical coats, but they weren't caring for anyone. Their hands moved with a clinical coldness. One man plunged a syringe into a patient's arm, then stepped back to watch as the victim convulsed violently. When it ended, the patient went limp. The man with the syringe scribbled on a clipboard, while others dragged the still body away like it was nothing but trash. My stomach twisted. This wasn't treatment. It was experimentation. Shaking, I stepped back, desperate not to make a sound. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I forced myself to move slowly. These weren't random criminals. This was too organized, too clean. For something like this to exist on a ship full of thousands of tourists, the crew had to be involved, or at least covering for it. The next morning, I tried to act normal, but every look from a staff member felt sharper, heavier, like they knew. At breakfast, I overheard a couple laughing that their friend hadn't returned to his room after drinking the night before. They assumed he was sleeping it off somewhere else. I didn't laugh. I knew better. By the 5th night, paranoia had completely taken me over. I tried to test the waters by chatting with a bartender, asking if people ever went missing on cruises. His face froze for just a fraction of a second before he forced a smile and said, "Sometimes people jump. Too much alcohol. Too much ocean." The way he said it, polished and practiced, told me it wasn't the first time he'd given that answer. That night, the noises came again, but I stayed locked inside. Around 3 a.m., footsteps stopped outside my cabin. A soft knock followed. Then a voice. "Sir, routine check. Please open." My chest went rigid. I hadn't asked for anything. I didn't answer. Another knock, harder this time. Silence. Then the faint shuffle of feet retreating. When morning came, I found a slip of paper pushed under my door. 4 words in messy writing. "They know you saw." I didn't eat that day. I barely moved. Was it a warning from someone else who'd seen? Or was it a trap? A way to see how I'd react? I couldn't tell, but I knew waiting meant death. On the 6th night, I forced myself into action. During a show, I blended into the crowd and slipped away, heading back toward the hidden stairwell. My heart thundered harder with every step. When I reached the door, I pulled out my phone and pushed it open just enough. What I saw was worse than before. There were more of them now. 10, maybe 12. Some were barely conscious, others thrashing weakly as needles pierced their skin. A woman screamed, her voice cracking, but the men didn't even react. They whispered to each other, scribbled notes, and watched her shake. My hand trembled so badly the phone nearly slipped as I hit record, zooming in on faces, on the victims. Then one of the men turned his head, locking eyes with the door. I slammed it shut and ran. By the time I made it back to my cabin, sweat was dripping from me, my chest heaving. The video had saved, faint audio and all. Proof. Enough, I thought. But then the intercom clicked on. A calm voice. Attention passengers, please remain in your cabins for a routine safety inspection. Crew will be conducting checks shortly. Routine inspection, just like the voice I'd heard at my door. My gut twisted. They were coming. I locked my door, shoved a chair under the handle, and pulled out my phone. No signal. Of course not. They own this ship. Outside footsteps echoed. Knocks on doors. Screams in the distance. When they reached mine, the knocks turned into pounding. "Sir, open immediately." I stayed frozen, gripping my phone so tight my knuckles turned white. The pounding stopped. Silence. Then the faint scrape of a key sliding into the lock. I backed into the corner, clutching my phone. If I didn't make it off that ship, maybe the phone would. Maybe someone would find it and know what really happened here. Because this cruise wasn't an escape. It was a cage. And I was next in line for their experiments. When I booked the trip, I thought it would be simple. 10 days at sea, no stress, no emails, no noise of the city. Just sun, water, and freedom. But instead, in the middle of the Atlantic, my life unraveled into a nightmare. It started on the third evening. I was having dinner in the grand dining hall, a glittering room with polished wood and chandeliers that sparkled under soft light. People laughed, glasses clinked, and everything looked perfect on the surface. But something felt wrong. The servers moved like machines, scanning the crowd with eyes that seemed too sharp, too aware. Maybe it was nothing, I told myself. Maybe I was just seasick or on edge. Later, I went to the bar, hoping to relax. That's when I noticed them. The men in suits. They weren't crew, at least not officially. Dark suits, earpieces, moving in pairs. Their eyes swept the room like hunters. At first, I thought they were private security for some rich passenger, but the way they watched people, measuring, studying, it wasn't protection, it was selection. The first clear sign came around 10 p.m. The ship's lights flickered, plunging the room into shadow for a moment. When they came back on, one of the men in a suit was leaning close to a woman, whispering something. Her face drained of color. Then his hand closed around her arm. She stiffened, frozen. My blood went cold. I started toward a server, planning to say something, but before I could, alarms blared. Not the dull sound of a drill. Sharp, piercing, urgent. Screams filled the hall as red emergency lights splashed across the polished floor. Panic broke out. Families shouting, children crying, people shoving toward the exits. But the suited men moved faster. Within seconds, small black guns appeared in their hands. Not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and deadly. They shouted commands, ordering everyone to the center of the room. Anyone who resisted felt the crack of a gun barrel against their ribs. Crew members who should have been guiding us stood frozen. Or maybe they weren't frozen at all. Maybe they were in on it. I ducked behind a buffet table with a handful of others. My whole body shook as I tried to stay hidden. My mind raced for an escape, but the hall was a cage. Every exit blocked, every door guarded. The men moved with purpose, separating passengers, herding families into different rooms, locking them behind heavy doors. A handful of us were pushed into a smaller lounge. Inside, silence took over. One man clutched a briefcase, whispering to himself. A woman cradled her child, rocking gently as though the motion alone could keep her safe. Around us, fear wrapped tight, and I kept asking myself the same question. Who were these men? Pirates? Criminals? Or something even darker that none of us could name? I realized quickly that these men knew the ship inside and out. They didn't wander or hesitate. They went straight to the places that let them control the lights, the elevators, and the communication systems. My phone had no signal. Every possible way out was either locked with codes or blocked by force. We were trapped. Hours dragged by, the sound of screams and crying echoing from different parts of the ship. I could tell time only by the slow roll of the ocean under us and the occasional clink of glasses from the VIP lounge above, where I was sure the attackers were based. Eventually, one of them came into the room. He was younger than I expected, maybe early 30s, and his expression was flat, almost bored, as if this was just another job. His eyes scanned us, sharp and cold, before he spoke in a voice that carried no warmth. Cooperate and no one gets hurt. Resist. He didn't finish, just let the silence carry the weight of the threat. We all nodded quickly, pretending to obey, though fear twisted my stomach tight. That's when I noticed something. One of the other hostages, a heavy-set man in his 40s, wasn't frozen like the rest of us. He was studying everything, the guards, their movements, their routines. His eyes caught mine, and with the smallest nod, I knew he was thinking the same thing as me. If we wanted to live, we had to act. When he whispered to me, it was quick, almost too quiet to hear. Timing was everything. We couldn't take them all head on, not with their weapons and numbers, but if we picked them off one at a time, there was hope. I forced myself to stay calm and watch, marking rotations, spotting blind corners, and paying attention to which doors could be locked from the inside. Every small detail mattered. Every footstep outside made my pulse race. Near dawn, the chance finally came. A group of the attackers had moved to the upper decks, leaving only a thin watch on us. The heavy-set man whispered the plan. We would wait for one guard, move as one, take him fast, grab his keys and gun, then start freeing people. My hands trembled, but adrenaline steadied me. When a guard stepped into the lounge to check on us, we didn't hesitate. We hit him hard and quick, the attack so sudden he couldn't even cry out. We stripped his keys, grabbed his handgun, and locked the doors behind us before anyone else could react. The hostages were wide-eyed with fear, but followed as we moved them to a safer space. With the guard's card, we unlocked cabins quietly, guiding families out one by one, trying to keep everyone calm. But the attackers noticed too quickly. Shouts tore through the halls. Footsteps thundered closer, weapons clicking as they prepared for a fight. Panic surged in me, but we couldn't stop. Using narrow service corridors I'd noticed earlier, we led people through the bowels of the ship. Children clung to parents, elderly passengers stumbled as we half-carried them along. Every turn felt like it could be our last. The ship moaned under the strain, the metal echoing each step. It was then I realized something terrifying. The bridge was theirs. They had control of the ship itself. If they steered us toward open waters, into international zones, no rescue would come. The thought made my stomach twist. We had to take it back. With a few stolen crew uniforms, we tried to blend in and move quietly, crouching low, ducking into shadows when patrols passed. Every moment was a gamble. Every second stretched into eternity. At last, we reached the bridge door. Inside, the last of the attackers were hunched over the controls, focused on the ship's systems. The heavy-set man gave me one look, and we moved. Bursting through the door, we shouted, waving the stolen gun. Chaos exploded. They fought back, fast and vicious, but the element of surprise was ours. The struggle was brutal but short. We managed to overpower them, dragging them to the engine room and locking them in. I seized the radio, my hands trembling, but my voice steady enough to send out the mayday. I gave every detail I could, the attackers, the weapons, the passengers, where they were being held. My voice cracked, but it didn't matter. Someone heard. An hour later, the thumping of helicopter blades filled the night sky. Bright beams of light swept across the deck as Coast Guard teams descended, weapons drawn, securing the ship and rounding up the men who had terrorized us. I collapsed right there on the bridge floor, shaking from head to toe. Around me, passengers clung to each other, some crying openly, others just staring in shock, whispering thanks. The aftermath felt unreal, like waking from a nightmare you can't fully leave. Later, I learned the truth. The men were part of a criminal ring using cruise ships as floating hideouts, running ransoms and smuggling under the cover of luxury vacations. Our desperate actions had saved hundreds, maybe more, but that knowledge didn't erase the scar. What was supposed to be a simple, relaxing escape had nearly cost us everything. When the ship finally docked and we walked down the gangway, escorted by authorities, sunlight glared off the calm harbor. People cheered softly, kissed the ground, held their families. I felt relief too, but mixed with a heavy paranoia I couldn't shake. Every ship, every crowded hallway, every quiet corner now felt dangerous. I walked off the gangway, blinking at the bright sun, but my mind was still locked in that night. The pounding footsteps, the screams, the helplessness. I knew right then that I'd never be the same again. That cruise had been meant to be my escape.